Welcome to a very special edition of Nostalgia Alley. This is a show I've wanted to do for years and years and years, and I'm blessed to be able to do it tonight. We're going to talk about Archbishop Fulton Sheen, one of the greatest spiritual leaders of all time. A man whose life affected millions with his dynamic way of speaking, love of humanity, and spiritual leadership. We are blessed today to have Sister Marlene Brownett, who is known Bishop Sheen from the age of 13. And Sister, describe a little bit about Fulton Sheen's early years.
I have a treasure, a book, a little book. It is now 100 years old. It was written in 1911 when Bishop Sheen was a young boy at Spalding Institute in Peoria, Illinois. And he kept track of his studies and of theater in his school. He was a great collector of ads for the theater. In fact, he even had it down to, I collected $124, and Rock, my friend, he created 56, so together we had $180. The best record they ever had at Spalding for our play, which was the story of high school freshmen.
Wow.
And he did say that the first performance went wonderfully. His brother Joe came in from the farm to Peoria to see the play. Fulton was an interesting young man, I think, certainly from this book. He kept records of his grades week by week. He didn't have to take the geometry exam in June because he passed an earlier exam at 95, the highest in the class. So you know from the beginning of his life he was something of a scholar, and that was attested to by his father's friend on the farm who used to say, Newt, that son of yours isn't going to amount to a row of beans. He's always got his nose in a book. And he did. But he also farmed. He took care of the cows, he took care of chickens. He didn't like to eat chicken when he got older because he had to kill so many as a young boy.
Oh.
We know that he loved athletics. He played on the midget basketball team.
The midget basketball team.
I think he said he was left forward, the LF, and he was also manager of that team, which won against St. Mary's with a score of 37-24. Wow. But he kept track of all of those things.
Now, how did Fulton Sheen enter your life?
I was a little girl listening to the radio on Sunday nights by myself, and I was probably 8 or 9 years old and fascinated by the voice, even though I may not have understood what he was talking about. And I told my father about him, and he said, oh, I know that name, Monsignor Sheen. He's going to be speaking in Bayonne. We can go. By that time, I had been listening maybe for 5 years. And it was 1948, October 1948. We went to the Knights of Columbus and heard him speak. And it was delightful because he came down the aisle in his red cape. I sat in the first row. My parents were in the back. And he stopped and he said, little girl, why are you up here by yourself? Where are your parents? I said, well, they're in the back, but I have to hear you and see you. He said, well, you're my FRR, front row rooter. Later on, as I became a sister, as a novice or postulant, he wrote to me, and I almost brought the letter tonight because I saved all of his letters, in which he said, my front row rooter has now become my first row sister, first pew sister.
You know, the thing that impressed me the most, not only his wonderful teachings, but his dynamic way of speaking, the way he would speak to an audience. Tell us a little bit about.
I think you have to see one of his programs to understand it. He prepared extensively. He would say, first of all, he prepared by prayer. Secondly, he always would begin with a story that was light and would bring people into the conversation. But he practiced the talk because he always delivered without any notes. He practiced it in French with a young woman in our office, Marie-Josée, and then he practiced it in Italian with a professor whom he knew. And then he said, it's in your head and you don't have to worry about notes.
And he was one of the first people, if not the first person, to do television. Life is Worth Living,
That's
1951 and 1957.
Right.
And
Every Tuesday night, 8 o'clock.
and he competed with Milton Berle
And Frank Sinatra.
and Frank Sinatra.
Yep.
And he got tremendously high
They
ratings.
gave him that time saying, well, we'll see if it works.
And I remember he got the Emmy Award, and he gave tribute to his 4 writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I
That's
love
right.
that. I love that.
Yes.
And he also loved comedians. He was competing against a comedian, but also was a big fan of comedians.
Good friend of Jackie Gleason's. Jackie Gleason used to call him my spiritual father. And Harry Hirschfield was a dear friend. Betty Walker, another comedian. And he, in fact, was given an award by an association of comedians. It was called the Circus Tent of Saints and Sinners.
Wow.
And it said, you are an honorary member.
And talk a little about his sense of humor. He had a wonderful sense of humor.
He did. Want to hear a story
Yes, I
about
would
Marie
love
José?
to hear a story.
In his work as head of the propagation of the faith, he was trying to support the missions and get people to be interested. And so he developed an idea, let's do films. And his great film, at one point, I don't know if it's still available, was Below the 30th Parallel, where he spoke about the poverty there. And he sent Marie José, the French girl, to a commercial film director and producer who happened to be a Jewish gentleman. And Marie José spoke French as that gentleman did, and they had a wonderful conversation. And he said to her, do you see Bishop Sheen every day? Yes. Do you speak to him every day? Yes. Does he speak to you every day? Yes. Oh, Christ, he's another Jesus. And the bishop said, theologically a little off, but it was a compliment.
The thing that impressed me most about Fulton Sheen was his generosity with finances and his personal belongings. Tell us a story about that. I don't know if you went to his house.
I have a lot of different stories, but I will tell the one about, I gave him a clock for his birthday. And I had it engraved with one of his favorite sayings from Saint Therese of Lisieux. It does not take much time to make us saints. It only takes much love. And when I gave it to him, brazen as I was, I said, please don't give this away, because whenever anyone came to his house and admired anything, it was in their hands. They took it home. Years later, when he was recovering from open heart surgery, I was sitting with him, and I looked at the foot of his bed, and I said, that's a lovely clock. He said, isn't it? I didn't remember giving it to him. That was that many years. And he said, take it back. And he gave it to me.
Wow.
So he gave it away.
And another story is he made a lot of money in royalties,
Yes.
but tell us how he handled all the money he made.
Well, the royalties that came in from the television shows and from the books, all of them were assigned to the propagation of the faith. And he said to the secretaries and to the people in the banking department or the monetary department, never show me the check. He didn't want to be touched by that. It was all for the work. It was not for him.
Incredible. And personally, what did you learn from Fulton Sheen? How did that affect your life?
Well, having met him in 1948, we became very good friends, the whole family, and I have letters where he always signs, and love to your mother, father, and sister. And we'll see you all soon. See you next Sunday at the telecast to the Catholic Hour. In 1952, he said, I'd like you to go to Rosemont College. I was going to go to Chestnut Hill, where my sister attended. He said, no, you're going to Rosemont. Rosemont College is run by the Sisters of the Holy Child Jesus. I am a sister of the Holy Child Jesus. So there you have, 60 years later, that's the influence. Here I am, a teaching sister.
I think he is wonderful. So many things you can learn from Fulton Sheen.
Mm-hmm.
And he personally touched many, many people.
He did.
And it was a hands-on situation rather than turning it over to his staff.
That's right.
He actually personally worked with the people.
Yes.
And you have some absolutely terrific stories that, two, for example,
two
that
we
just are incredible.
Okay. The bishop had a great appeal to the masses. He could get you in an audience and you'd be mesmerized. There'd be silence and laughter when he told a joke. It was spontaneous. He could also approach people intimately, one-on-one. He had that great gift of humanity. One time he was preaching, I think it was a 3 hours agony at St. Patrick's. He used to do that almost every year. He did it in the afternoon for 3 hours and in the evening for 3, and he stood all the time or knelt all during that. There was a woman in the church at that time, and after, she came up to him. The FBI was on the lookout for her. She was a known thief. She had entered the cathedral on that day, because she knew it would be crowded, to steal purses. She came to the bishop and she said, "That word from the cross to the 2 thieves, you got me on that. That really got to me. I couldn't steal a thing." And the bishop spoke with her, and the FBI spoke with the bishop, and he said, "Please, will you give her into my custody, and I will see that things go right." They did. She was sent to the Virgin Islands. The bishop supported her the rest of her life, and maybe 6 years ago, or more than that, no, much more, because it was before the bishop died, a letter came to the office saying that this lady, Mary, I won't give her name, had died an extremely holy, peaceful death. He took care of her.
Well, I think we have about a minute left, and I want to get into that other wonderful story. So I think we're going to break slightly early for a public service announcement, and we'll come right back with another.
Oh, the wonderful.
About the actress, which it just breaks your heart. So stay tuned, and we will be right back.
After 17 years working as a mason, Mike was laid off. I met him when he came into the library looking for help. He found a job opening, but the application was only online. Mike said he'd spent his entire life around tools, but had never used a computer. I showed him how, and he ended up applying for numerous jobs online. I saw Mike the other day. His new computer skills paid off. He's working again.
New Jersey libraries are transforming lives. Tell us your story.
Welcome back to Nostalgia Alley. We're here with Sister Marlene Brownett, and we're talking about Fulton Sheen. And we were talking about how he touched people's lives. And there's a wonderful story that I'd love you to tell.
Yes. When the bishop was a young priest, he was stationed for a while in London at St. Patrick's in Soho. And he was an American, and the Americans got up very early, so it was a cold Epiphany morning, January 6th. And he opened the church door, and a limp figure kind of fell in the door. And he said, "Oh, are you all right?" "Yes." "Why are you here?" And she said, "Where am I, Father?" And he said, "Oh, you're in church. You are Catholic?" "I was, but not anymore." "Why?" "Well, I'm going out with 3 men, and they've all begun to find out about it, so I went out and I got drunk. And you've been out here all night. Come in." And he gave her a cup of tea, talked with her for a while, and then said, as he was bringing her out the door, "Is that you on that billboard across the street?" She said, "Yes, I'm the star of that musical comedy." He said, "Come back this afternoon, and we'll talk a little. After the matinee." She said, "I'll come back, Bishop." He was just Father then. "I'll come back, Father, as long as you promise me that you won't ask me to go to confession." "I promise you I will not ask you to go to confession." She came back. They spoke for a while. He said, "Wouldn't you like to come into the church with me? We have a Rembrandt and a Van Dyck. I think you'd like to see them. You're an artist." "Yes, I'd like that very much." So they walked down the aisle, past one picture, past a confessional, and he pushed her in. And he said, "I didn't ask her. I promised I would not ask." And 2 years later, he gave her the veil as a nun, a cloistered sister at Tyburn Abbey in London. And I know the story to be true because I know the woman. She is a magnificent, holy, wonderful sister, now gone to heaven, praying for all of us, I'm sure.
Beautiful story. I know late in his later years, he faced a lot of problems and, physical and other problems. And I'd like to kind of get an idea of his later life.
He did. He physically, he had a great deal of suffering. He also had other suffering, and he always said suffering comes from the inside and the outside, but all of it is in God's hands, as we are. And he accepted suffering, and he decided never to speak about much of it with anyone. And he did have he had heart surgery, and so much blood was lost they had to fill the blood bank, but all the policemen of New York came and gave blood.
I bet he had a lot of volunteers for that.
Oh, he sure did. He certainly did. We filled the place with people. And his doctor, when he was in the emergency room, not the emergency, intensive care unit, there are two stories. One is he was really, right after the surgery, pretty much out of it. And he heard someone saying that the man next to him was dying. And I was there, and I saw his hand go up, and he gave a blessing. About 6 weeks later, that woman came to the hospital, the wife of that man, and said, "Bishop, you blessed my husband as he was dying, didn't you?" And he said, "Yes." And she gave him a long life Jewish medal to hold, and he treasured that. He treasured that. And
one of the many people he blessed and helped throughout his life.
Another time, he asked if he could please say Mass, and he was hardly able to pick himself up. And they arranged for a priest to come and to set up an altar at the bottom of his bed there in intensive care. And his surgeon, Dr. Walsh, who also was a Jewish gentleman, came, and I remember him sitting on the edge of a table way in the corner and just staring at the bishop. And after he said, "I have never seen anything like that." That man pulled himself up and recited all of the words of the Mass with the celebrant. He said, "It's extraordinary. How did that happen?" The grace of God.
The grace of God.
Yes.
And I noticed talk about having him made a saint, and I think it's well deserved. Tell us a little bit about how a person becomes a saint, how it happens, and
well, before I do that, I want to tell
timeline.
you about a very brazen little 14-year-old walking down Madison Avenue with the bishop to his radio broadcast, who looked up at him, myself, and said, "Monsignor," he was then, "Monsignor, is Fulton a saint's name?" And he said, "Not yet." So I believe that he really wants to be a saint. He wants everyone to be a saint. That's our mission. We're called to great holiness, and that's what sanctity is. But then canonization.
What's the procedure of that?
It's a very extensive procedure. It goes through several steps, and it has to be started by a bishop in a diocese, and the Bishop of Peoria opened the cause in 2002. So, and it has to be approved by Rome, and the person then is studied, and there are witnesses who vouch for his life and his holiness. And there's a devil's advocate who looks to say, not that holy. There has
Literally
to be
the
that.
devil's advocate.
They call him the devil's advocate, right, the people who share the facts that maybe not. And then they have to write a paper, a positio, several volumes usually, that speak about the holiness and the heroic virtue of the person. First, he declared a servant of God. If that is all passed, it's read, and then a group of theologians read the books and the papers and the witness, he can be declared venerable by the Holy Father. And then they study miracles, possible miracles. And the church just doesn't make saints like that. This has to be studied. It's not a foolish, quick thing. You look and you see, was there really a miracle? In other words, a real cure. Medical intervention, no. A cure.
And what are
Through
some of the
God.
miracles they're looking at involving
Well, there are
Archbishop
two
Fulton Sheen?
possible miracles right now. One of a little boy who survived a very serious illness. The other of a lady who has since died, but who had a serious aneurysm, so much so that when they operated on her, she was from Illinois, I believe, the doctor said she's never going to survive. We're not going to be able to save her. Her insides are like tissue paper. And her husband went to the chapel of the hospital and prayed just to Bishop Sheen. Help my wife. She survived for 7 years. And the doctor said, we don't know how, but she did.
Now, I know it's a very expensive thing to do. There's a lot of money involved,
Yes.
unfortunately.
But you don't buy sainthood.
Oh, I
Nobody
know
can
that,
buy
but
it.
you know, there are lawyers and
That's it,
doctors and
right.
so many things. And I think if people want to help or they want more information, they can go and on their computer under www.archbishopsheencause.org.
That's right, yes.
But I understand it can take 50 years or 100 years or 10 years. We don't really
That's
know
right.
the time
We
frame.
don't know. The study takes time. And you are so right about canon lawyers, civil lawyers, people who publish the books. You have to have them printed. All of that costs money, everything. To send out holy cards, to send out information about the cause, to spread the news of what the bishop did in his life and what he expects us to do with our lives. Takes time and takes money. If you're going to do a television show, it costs money.
I know.
Everything. We live in a world where things cost.
And there was a very touching scene between him and the Pope at St. Patrick's Cathedral. Tell us a little bit about that moment.
I was not there, but I certainly have seen pictures of that. And the Holy Father, whom the bishop knew, he had known him at the council in Rome, Vatican Council II. And the Holy Father got to the altar and said, "Where is the bishop?" And his doctor had been with him. He wasn't supposed to go there, but he got permission from his doctor. I think that was in October, and he died in December. And the Holy Father embraced him and said to him, "You are a loyal son of the church. You have written and spoken well of the Lord Jesus." That was a culmination of a career, because the bishop truly believed that the Holy Father is the vicar of Christ on earth. And he had great devotion. He used to say, where Peter is, there is the Lord. There is the church.
And I also understand they're trying to make a museum in El Paso, Illinois,
They are.
devoted to Fulton Sheen. And that, of course, needs
They have
support
some
too.
items already. They have vestments that he wore when he was able to celebrate not just in the Roman rite of the church, but in the Byzantine rite. He was invited to do that and given permission to celebrate, they called it, both rituals.
And the incredible thing about Archbishop Fulton Sheen, he wrote over 100 books. Is there one that kind of inspired you in your life? One that people that you would recommend?
No, not one, all.
All.
You have to read all of them.
You have to read all.
The Life of Christ is probably his greatest book, but the others are wonderful too. And he's written about priesthood, he's written about marriage.
And he was also responsible for millions, I would think, of Catholics returning to the church.
Yes.
I mean, the inspiration of this man was unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. There was a woman, I don't know if we have time for another
Oh,
story.
we have 2 minutes and 42 seconds,
I'll try
sister.
to do it fast. When he was just a young priest, one of his first converts, a woman said, "Please, will you speak to my daughter-in-law? She hates Catholics." So we went to the house. She opened the door, spit in his face, and told him to get out. He went out, and he prayed for her every single morning. That was in September. February, she called him and said, please come, I need to see you. He said, why are you calling me? He said, the doctor told me I'm going to die in 2 weeks. He said, you will not die in 2 weeks. You will take care of your children. He said, I think God is frightening you home. And in May, he had, now this remember, September, February, May, he baptized, didn't rebaptize her, he gave her First Communion and brought her back to the church. She had left it.
Wow. You know, we can talk about Fulton Sheen, and the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. And I know that if you go onto YouTube, they have a wonderful site of all of Fulton Sheen's early stuff and later stuff. And being of not a religious background, I remember as a kid sitting in front of that TV set, just spellbound by the dynamics of this man, I mean. And it's kind of sad when you go on YouTube and you go under Fulton Sheen, and Fulton Sheen has 22,000 hits, and Lady Gaga has 6 million.
Right.
I mean, I want to really reverse that, because
I wish you could.
I wish I could too, but I think there's this hope in the young people.
I think young people would love him if we would put him in front of them. They don't have the opportunity, but if we can make that opportunity for them, I believe that they will find something that they're looking for.
And
They look for goodness, and they recognize it. Young people, I've dealt with them all my life, teaching life at any rate, so.
And the thing that amazes me, I can watch something he did over 50 years ago, and it's as relevant today as it was 50 years ago.
That's a saint.
It is.
The saints are relevant forever.
And if you're interested, www.archbishopsheencause.org. I want everybody to get on there, and you know. And would you do me a favor, sister? Would you close how Fulton Sheen would close?
As Fulton Sheen would say to everyone, bye now, and God love you.
And God love you, and thank you for tuning in. And this is Mike Sobel, along with Sister Marlene Brownett, talking about truly a great man, Fulton Sheen.
Mike, thank you.
Thank you, sister.
Thank you so much.